This morning, the quorum break. Democrats in D.C., Austin at a standstill. We are in Washington. State Rep Svitek Thompson, the longest-serving woman in the Texas legislature. She broke quorum in 2003. What she learned then that she's determined not to repeat now. The Texas Senate is still passing legislation. But is there any room for compromise with Democrats? Senator Paul Bettencourt joins us from Houston. And State Rep Chris Turner, the chair of the House Democratic Caucus, masterminded this maneuver. How long was it in the works? And can he keep his coalition together?
Inside Texas Politics with Jason Whiteley starts now.
Good morning from Washington. I'm Jason Whiteley. The biggest Texas political news is happening right here in the nation's capital. But first, before we begin our program, let's catch you up on what else is happening across our state. Texas Land Commissioner George P. Bush is suing the Biden administration. Bush is arguing that Biden had no legal right to stop building Trump's border fence since Congress had already appropriated money for it. Remember, though, that Bush is running for Texas Attorney General against two other Republicans and could probably use the headlines. The Dallas County Republican Party is looking for a new leader. The chairman is former State Rep Rodney Anderson, but he just got a promotion at his other job requiring more travel and said he's unable to run the county party. Anderson is now endorsing an attorney named Jennifer Stoddard-Hoydu. The party will decide on Anderson's replacement in the coming weeks. And Senator Ted Cruz mocked Texas Democrats for leaving the state. Cruz called it a political stunt, but that one backfired on the senator. Cruz quickly got mocked himself for fleeing the state 6 months ago, as you remember, as his constituents were freezing to death during the winter storm. Last Sunday on our program here, Texas Democrats told us they were talking about breaking quorum. Well, 24 hours after our program, they made good on that promise. 58 of them fled to a hotel here in Washington, D.C. Our first guest, one of the most widely respected members of the Texas legislature. It's State Representative Svitek Thompson. She's a Democrat from Houston, the longest-serving woman in the Texas legislature, who spoke to us here in D.C. Representative Thompson, it's good to see you. Thanks for being on the program here. I want to start with congressional Democratic leaders. I'm sure you've heard this as well, too. They say they do not have the votes to get anything passed right now and don't think they will anytime soon. So what do you think the end game is for Texas House Democrats?
I think the end game is to let them know the urgency it is for them to act and to lay our case to them, which we've been doing while we've been here these last several days.
But if they don't have the votes, is it worth being here in this area?
I think it's worth being here, and I think it's worth trying, because I believe you need to make your case, you need to try, and you need to be persistent. And let me tell you why I think it's worth for me to be here. I can go back in my childhood, and I was reared by my grandparents. And my grandmother and them used to save nickels and pennies together to buy poll tax. Not quarters, because they was only making about $2 a week. But you're trying to be able to be a participant in democracy. And then you have to fast forward to the fact that persons who struggle to get voting rights for the masses of minority people in this country, the things that they went through, the bombings, the killings, the beatings, the unleashing of dogs on them, water holes, all of those things that happened to them. And then culminating to having to count how many bubbles in a bar of soap or how many beans in a bag. And having to pass signs that says, no dogs, no Negroes, no Mexicans. And that's why I came, because I think it's imperative that I have not only be able to maintain and preserve the rights of my constituents, but to be able to pass on something to the next generation.
It seems the next generation might not recognize the urgency of this, though. Why do you think that is?
I think because they have not been familiarized with the struggles that it took.
When the new voter ID law passed a few years ago, I remember Democrats saying it was going to reduce turnout, but that didn't happen because we had these, record turnout last November. What makes you think that the same thing's not going to happen with this legislation that Republicans are proposing now?
We had the record turnout last November because we were able to implement things during the pandemic that necessitated persons to be able to go and vote.
24-hour voting.
24-hour voting, curbside voting, and many other things.
So by getting rid of those, which Republicans want to do now, that would impact that, you think?
I think it would. And listen, look at the bill. You have people who are disabled complaining about the fact that when I fill out my ballot as a disabled person, and you're requiring me to sign the back of that envelope. My signature 10 years ago may not look like what it looks now because I may have had a stroke and I have some difficulty signing my name. Or when I take my caretaker with me to the polls to help me with my voting there, because this is a person who takes care of me and I'm asking them questions and things, help me do this or help me do that. It's all right to clean the poop off of them, but it's going to be illegal for them to help them vote.
You were part of the 2003 walkout when Democrats went to Oklahoma. What did you learn then, 18 years ago, that you don't want to repeat now?
I learned that we didn't persist long enough in an effort to be able to accomplish the thing that we could have accomplished. But we did make some headways on a few things.
So what does that mean now?
It means now that we have to press the flesh a little harder, walk the pavement a little more, and be more persistent, and maybe more refined in what our ask is up here. Because sometimes you can't get the whole loaf, but if you can get a pretty good size of it, it's pretty good.
Representative, you were first elected in 1972.
I was.
How?
The year of the woman.
The year of the woman.
Yes.
How long do you intend to serve?
You know, this is what I tell myself. I have wonderful constituents, and I'm not saying it to make them feel good. It is a fact. And they have given me such a privilege to be able to come up and fight for issues that impact our community. And I just ask God for one thing. When it's time for me to stop, let me know when you want me to step down, and I'll do it.
Thank you for the time.
Thank you for the interview.
So Representative Thompson there is just one of more than 50 Democratic state lawmakers here in D.C., along with 12 paid staffers and a number of reporters. But the costs are quickly mounting for Democrats for this trip, so who is paying for it? Patrick Svitek is a star reporter at the Texas Tribune. Always happy to have you on, Patrick. We heard Governor Abbott initially spread some misinformation about this, saying that it's a taxpayer junket. It's not that, though.
Yeah, our reporting has shown that so far, the big expenses of this trip have been paid for by the House Democratic Caucus, the Mexican American Legislative Caucus, and through the campaign accounts of two House Democratic leaders, Chris Turner and Trey Martinez Fisher. The House Democratic Caucus has said it paid for those private flights that took lawmakers out of Austin on Monday. And then those groups have all split costs when it comes to meals, lodging, and other transportation like buses to get around, that kind of thing. And so far, it seems like those big ticket costs have been covered by campaign funds, not by taxpayer funds. Obviously, these lawmakers under the state constitution are entitled to any day they're in session, they're entitled to a daily per diem, which is currently $221 per day. And we saw this week that Republican leaders were demanding that those lawmakers begin the process of returning that per diem. So that's the one area where taxpayer funds, at least one area where taxpayer funds are wrapped up in this process.
We have a lot more we want to quiz you about this in just a few moments. Patrick, back to you in just a minute. Thank you for that, though. Coming up, the Democratic mastermind behind this maneuver here, State Rep Chris Turner, the chair of the House Democratic Caucus, as Patrick was just talking about there. He talks to us about the Democrats' next move. And our Texas Republicans, they're passing bills out of the state Senate, but is there any room for compromise on voting with Democrats? One of our questions for State Senator Paul Betancourt. Inside Texas Politics from Washington, D.C. Back in just a moment. 56 years ago, our country was in the middle of another fight over voting rights, and it was a Texan, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, who eventually got the 1965 Voting Rights Act passed right here in Washington, D.C. Well, today the LBJ Foundation says Republicans are now unraveling LBJ's legacy. This is the context you need to understand the issue at hand today. And it's the latest episode of our political podcast called Y'all-itics. If your phone is handy, aim its camera right here at the QR code on your screen. It will take you directly to this episode this morning. Getting 58 Texas lawmakers to D.C. is not accomplished overnight. So how long have Texas Democrats had this in the works? Our next guest this morning is the mastermind behind this political maneuver. It's State Representative Chris Turner, a Democrat from Grand Prairie, and he is also the chair of the House Democratic Caucus. Representative Turner, welcome back to the program. Congressional Democratic leaders here and Senate leaders say they don't have the votes to get anything passed now, and they don't expect those votes anytime soon. So considering that, after a week here in D.C., what's the end game? Does it change at all?
Well, Jason, thanks for having me. It's good to be back with you. We're not going to take that as an acceptable answer. What's happening in Texas and what happened in Georgia and is happening in other states across the country is corrosive to our democracy, is making harder for people to vote, and it is all based on the big lie that Donald Trump won the last election. That's that big lie that led to the insurrection on January 6th. It's the big lie that's leading to all these voter suppression bills, and it has to stop. Congress is the only one who can stop it.
Speaker Phelan revoked the leadership position for Joe Moody. What is lost in that?
A great deal is lost in that. I said today that the smartest decision Speaker made was appointing Joe Moody, Speaker pro tem. Today is by far the dumbest decision he's made. It is simply short-sighted. Joe is a strong, principled leader who has the respect of Democrats and Republicans alike, and he helps make the House run. He helps make the House work. And so I think the Speaker hurt himself by removing Joe from that position. But you can take a title away from Joe Moody. You're not going to take away his work ethic. You're not going to take away his character and principles and his commitment to doing the right thing for the people of Texas and the Texas House. So Joe's going to be fine. I think the Speaker hurt himself, though.
As chair of House Democrats, you're obviously leading this effort, but you don't just launch an operation like this overnight with chartered planes, chartered buses, the hotel space, et cetera. How long has this been in the works for Democrats? Well,
it did come together rather quickly, actually. I think we always knew that this was definitely a real possibility. I think that we consider this an option all along, but the planning really accelerated over last weekend during those rushed committee hearings in the House and the Senate, and it did come together very, very quickly in a matter of a couple of days.
The challenge for you, as you well know, it's probably keeping you up at night, is keeping the coalition together. How do you do that over the remaining 3 weeks of the session?
Sure, and that's a real dynamic, particularly in a big group of more than 50 people. So, we do it through constant and open communication. That's why we meet as a caucus every morning for breakfast and every night for dinner, in addition to all the meetings and activities we're doing throughout the day in groups, or in a big group or a small group.
Are you or your members getting any pushback from constituents?
I've gotten good feedback from my constituents. They appreciate that we're taking a stand against Republican overreach and standing for voting rights. We understand there's Texans who disagree with our decision and may not appreciate this approach. But what we want our constituents to know is that all of us are working night and day up here to protect the voting rights of all Texans. That's what this is about.
Representative Turner, thank you for the time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Jason. Good to be with you.
The Texas House sits dormant this weekend as Democrats are here in D.C., but the Texas Senate is still cranking out legislation. The question is, what's the point? Without a quorum, the House cannot consider those bills. That is among our questions for State Senator Paul Bettencourt. He is a Republican from Houston. Senator Bettencourt, welcome back to our program. I want to ask you about the changes to the election laws that the Senate has already passed out towards the House. Is there any room at all for compromise with Democrats?
Well, there's already been substantial changes in SB 1 that come from the past set of hearings and what happened in the regular session. So I think it's an approved document, and we had 4 Democrat senators there listening to the debate. They didn't vote for the bill. The bill advanced along party lines, but the debate was a lot less shrill than it was in the regular session. And for example, what's important to me is that citizenship verification stay in the bill, because citizenship verification is important, because to vote is a right of citizenship. So as long as we have the right things for Republicans, and we have listened to Democrats, which we've clearly made several changes in the bill, this bill should advance. And instead of commenting on from Washington, they should be here voting on it in Texas.
Wouldn't this bill have had a better chance if both parties sat down to craft it?
Well, in many respects, we've now iterated on this 4 or 5 times. So yes, both parties have, through debate, crafted it. And actually, one of the people that was in Washington commenting on the bill was Senator West. We took an amendment from Senator West on the floor back in May on the bill.
Senator, explain to our viewers why the Senate is still passing out legislation, it seems almost daily, if it's obvious the House is not in session and the House can't vote on it. Why is the Senate still at work?
Well, first off, nothing is written, okay? And the Democrats could come back. Now, the other thing is it's our job to be in the Capitol and voting on bills. So we're doing our work. And it's sad that the House is closed, but the Democrat House caucus is going to have to recognize that they're wrong. Texans don't support walkouts. They never have. It's going to fail. It's a question of time. So they might as well come back next week as opposed to next month. Because if it's next month, all that's going to happen is Governor Abbott's just going to call another special session. Look, Texans want their legislators to work. And we've seen it in 72. We've seen it in 2003. And 2021 is going to be no different.
Senator, you just got some legislation passed, long overdue property tax relief for 2 specific groups of people. Explain what this would do.
Real quickly, it's good news for homeowners. If you're under 65, you get your first-time homestead exemption. It's been a quirk in the law for a long time, and that when people buy a home, they can get walloped with a huge tax bill because they don't get homestead exemptions the first year. And over 65, the great news is, and this is 1.9 million homeowners, that as the tax rates are going to come down because of Senate Bill 2 and House Bill 3 from last election, as values go up, rates are going to come down, and that's going to change your frozen value that you pay on. It's called your freeze, and the good news, that means tax relief too. And that's another reason why the Democrats need to come back. That's 2.25 million homeowners just in those 2 bills. And they passed unanimously out of the Senate with Democrats and Republican support. So the Democrats need to come back and vote so we can put them on the ballot and get that tax relief to folks as soon as possible. Otherwise, it's going to wait till next year.
Senator Betancourt, we appreciate the time as always. Thank you.
Thank you.
When we come back here in Washington this morning, what realistically are Democrats going to gain from being here in D.C.? And more importantly, doesn't this just mean Republicans will likely be tougher on redistricting? We're going to start there in just a moment on the Roundtable. And back here in Washington, D.C., it is time for Reporters Roundtable to put the headlines in perspective. Patrick Svitek is back with us from the Texas Tribune. Bud Kennedy from the Fort Worth Star-Telegram joins us each week, and so does Bernadine Steptoe, the political producer at WFAA in Dallas. But Patrick, let's start with you. And Governor Abbott already calling a special session to begin immediately after this one ends. The governor's making true on his promise here. The question is, how long can Democrats hold out, huh?
Yeah, like you said, the governor has vowed to call special session after special session until they get this agenda passed, including that elections bill, and by saying that he's prepared to call a subsequent one as soon as the day after the current one ends. He's laying down a marker and showing that he's not messing around. Whether that changes the House Democrats' plans, remains to be seen. There's just a lot up in the air right now, and even though he's making clear we're going to have this immediate subsequent special session, it's not clear that's going to do anything to bring House Democrats back to Austin anytime soon.
So then, Bud, the next question for me is, if Congress isn't moving here in Washington, D.C., what are Democrats going to gain? And doesn't this just make things harder and much more tense for redistricting, which happens later this fall?
Well, everything is going to be worse. Texas Democrats are aligning themselves closely with the National Democrats, and they may pay a price for the result. They're making it clear that they are the party of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Nancy Pelosi, and that's not terribly the most popular party in Texas. So they're really doing the National Democrats' work, helping fundraise, helping draw attention to elections, which they will portray as Donald Trump's issue, that Republicans are doing Donald Trump's work. They're going to pay the price for it back here at home.
Bernadine, having covered the 2003 walkout that Senate Democrats did to Albuquerque, they didn't really gain anything by doing that. So from the 30,000-foot view, zoom out here, what are Texas Democrats going to gain by staying here in D.C. for who knows how long?
Well, one thing that they are doing is they are energizing their Democratic base. And as Representative Thompson said, they did learn something, and that was not to cave so soon. They're on their own agenda, and whatever the Republicans say or whatever the Republicans do, they're going to do it. And keep in mind, this is politics. And just because they're in D.C. doesn't mean that that's going to change what the Republicans would have done anyway. But at least they are energizing their base as well.
And Patrick, doesn't this just make things a lot more difficult later this fall?
Yeah, I mean, there's only so long they can hold out. And so this, is only in some ways delaying the inevitable. And it's really not really a question of, if this elections bill is going to pass. It's a matter of when. And I guess a more minor question would be if the Democrats could use their leverage to maybe water down this bill a little bit. But clearly, if you look at the remarks recently from Governor Abbott and Republican lawmakers, they're in no mood to further compromise on this bill right now.
But in the final seconds here, I want to ask you about the 12-pack of Miller Lite that was seen with them. 30 seconds left here. Does that help or hurt Democrats?
Well, it's speaking from Fort Worth, where Miller Lite was born and where Miller Lite's brewed. It's good for votes in a purple county in Texas. But to go along with this kind of crusade, I don't think the Freedom Riders carried a 12-pack of beer.
All right. Bud, Patrick, Bernadine, thank you very much. We appreciate you watching as well for us from here in Washington, D.C. Hope to see you again next week as well. Have a good week.